I've been reading Julius Caesar's account of his conquest of Gaul, and I must say that Julius Caesar, from what I have been reading so far, was very reasonable, civil, and even merciful. When Gauls would approach him asking for friendship, mercy, asking for an alliance, he would honor their requests. When they would surrender, he would honor their surrender. And at times, there were Gauls who would take advantage of his kindness. In one story, a group of Gauls approached the Romans asking for friendship, and Julius Caesar granted their request, and he allowed them to have refuge amongst his soldiers. And then one day, some of them left off and went to an enemy tribe called the Nervi. The Nervi were a very warlike tribe that had a very large army of about 60,000 men, and they were definitely an enemy to Rome. And these Gauls, who had taken advantage of Julius Caesar's kindness, they gave the Nervi information about how the Romans conducted their camp, how they would enter their camp. And they told the Nervi that in between each Roman legion was a baggage train. And so after the first legion would enter the camp, it would take time for the next legion to enter because they would have to wait for the baggage train to enter the camp, thus giving a window of opportunity to the Nervi to ambush the Roman soldiers as they were waiting to enter their camp, and also to ambush their baggage trains and loot all of their stuff, to steal all of their stuff. This information was given to the Nervi by a group of Gauls who had been given mercy by Julius Caesar, and they were taking advantage of his kindness. The Nervi did indeed attack the Roman troops, and it was absolutely devastating. The Nervi almost had a victory over the Romans. They attacked the Roman soldiers, and there was immense slaughter. Julius Caesar talks about how the one Roman military leader was wounded so many times that he just fell down and died. They were Roman soldiers who were wounded, who were just laying on the ground, completely vacuous of morale or energy or willpower. They were Romans who were so scared that they were running away. They were Romans who just had lost their will to fight. Julius Caesar brought with him warriors from Numidia. They were Numidian warriors. These were warriors from Africa. Numidians were a people from Africa. He had archers from Cyprus, and he also had a lot of young men from Rome who had not really seen combat. These were fresh soldiers, and they were all losing. They were all being defeated. And they were centurions who were being overtaken by these Gaulish warriors. These Gaulish warriors were no joke in the battlefield. I've heard it said before that the Gauls didn't really have an advanced military force, but really the Gaulish warriors, according to Julius Caesar himself, the Gaulish warriors were just as good at fighting as the Roman soldiers were. And in this case, the Roman soldiers were being vanquished. They were being defeated. And from a distance was a legion of Roman soldiers who were the most efficient at fighting in the whole Roman army under Julius Caesar in Gaul. And this was the 10th Legion. The 10th Legion was the most trained army that Julius Caesar had in Gaul. They were the most trained. They were the best fighters. These were the guys that Julius Caesar trusted in the most. These were the guys that Julius Caesar had the most confidence in. And they were watching their men being crushed, being slaughtered. They attacked the Nervi. They entered the fray. They attacked the Nervi, and they were defeating the Nervi, thus reviving the morale and the will to fight amongst the Roman soldiers who were losing before the 10th Legion entered the fight. And together, as one, they fought against the Nervi and slaughtered the Nervi warriors. And out of an army of about 60,000 fighters, only about 600 or so, maybe 500 or 600 or so of the Nervi fighters were not killed. Julius Caesar's military also destroyed most of the politicians of the Nervi. But Julius Caesar did not do a massacre of the Nervi civilian population. Before the Nervi had made their attack on the Romans, they had placed their civilian population within a marshland. Julius Caesar did not do any sort of slaughter or massacre of the Nervi civilian population because he had mercy and he had civility. And this was, it was obviously diplomatic, but it was really amazingly merciful, because a lot of times when you read medieval history or ancient history, you will read about whole-scale massacres being done. And there is another example of Julius Caesar's mercy being taken advantage of, and that was his experience with the Attuatusi. The Attuatusi were another very warlike tribe of Gaul, and they had this very long earth mound fortification. It was about 12 feet high, and it was about 4 miles long. And the Attuatusi, and the word Attuatusi, it sounds very French, right? Attuatusi. The word Attuatusi, it sounds French, so you could say it's Proto-French, I guess. I don't know. But the Attuatusi, they were very comfortable as long as they were in their fortification. The Romans began to build a siege tower, and the Attuatusi took notice of this. They took notice that the Romans were building it from some distance from their... they were building it at some distance from their fortification. And the Attuatusi thought, why are they building this siege tower so far away from our fortification? That's just foolish and silly and pointless. So they began to scream at the Roman soldiers, telling them, how could men with such little muscles defeat us? How could men of such little stature defeat us? How could your siege tower do anything to us when you're building it at such far of a distance? And what the Attuatusi did not understand was that this siege tower could move. So once the Romans completed the building of their siege tower, they began to move their siege tower towards their fortification. Attuatusi were so terrified by this that they sent some men over to Julius Caesar to surrender. Julius Caesar honored their surrender, and he did not allow for any sort of massacre to happen on the civilian population within their fortification. Julius Caesar told them, in order for this surrender to be done, to be accepted, you're going to have to give me all of your weapons. Attuatusi said, well, it's hard for us to do that because our weapons are our only means of self-defense, and we just don't want to do that. And Julius Caesar did not believe in the Second Amendment. There was no Second Amendment. He said, well, in order for me to accept your surrender, you're going to have to give me all of your weapons, because Julius Caesar really didn't trust these people. So the Attuatusi, they began to throw out all their weapons from their fortification, and they say that there were so many weapons that were thrown out that a mound of weapons was as high as the walls of this fortification. That's how many weapons these people had. So they threw out all of their weapons. Well, they were throwing out all of their weapons, most of their weapons, as we will find out in a little bit. And there was a pile of weapons that was as high as the walls of this fortification, and the walls were about 12 feet high. So there were a lot of weapons. What the Romans did not know was that the Attuatusi had left about a third of their arms within their fortification. At night, the Attuatusi launched an attack on the Roman camp, launching spears at the Romans. The Romans responded to the attack by efficiently defeating the Attuatusi, and after they surrendered, Julius Caesar had the entire civilian population of the Attuatusi sold into slavery. So they took advantage of his kindness, and Julius Caesar responded to this abuse of his kindness by punishing them, by selling them into slavery. And this is the problem with a lot of people. They see mercy and kindness as weakness, And then they act shocked and disturbed and surprised when their abuse is responded to with firmness and ferocity. Now, I have read a lot of medieval literature. I have read a lot of medieval literature about the First Crusades. And reading Julius Caesar's account of his conquest of Gaul, I am actually quite amazed at how civil and merciful he was. Because when Julius Caesar defeated the Attuatusi, or when he defeated the Nervi, he showed mercy to their civilian populations. When the Crusades defeated the Muslims in Jerusalem, they did a massacre. They slaughtered elderly people. They would even go out and try to kidnap kids. And I didn't pull this out of my head. I remember reading this in a book that I read years ago. It was a book by a medieval French monk by the name of Ralph of Cayenne, and he wrote an account of the First Crusade. And he describes these sorts of things. He describes how there was a massacre of the civilian population in Jerusalem, and he describes how the Crusader warriors were going out and trying to kidnap children. And I find that pretty disturbing. When the Crusaders invaded Constantinople, they did a horrific massacre of the population. They destroyed the city. They raped. This is stuff that is just the complete antithesis to the Christian faith. It's anti-Christian. And here they were claiming the cross and doing atrocities. But yet when Julius Caesar did battles, when he had victories over the enemy tribes in Gaul, he would show mercy. It's quite amazing how a pagan can appear so Christian. And it harkens back to that verse in the New Testament in which St. Paul talks about how those who did not know Christ will be judged based on what they knew, based on the morality that they knew. And he talks about how there is a law that was put into the hearts of man by God. When God created man, he put an internal law. He put an innate law, a law that is embedded into the human soul, into humanity itself. Humans have a basic knowledge of right and wrong. They have a general knowledge of right and wrong. And even if someone is not a Christian, they can still have a concept of right and wrong, absolutely, because God has built that into us. But here you have Julius Caesar not knowing Christ, not knowing Christianity, before Christianity even. And he had morality. He had a sense of mercy. He had a sense of justice. That was already there in humanity. What paganism did was it pulled humanity away from the laws of God and got them to follow the chaos of Satan. Paganism really was the system of the Lord of Chaos. And I believe that paganism ultimately was a corruption of the true religion that was taught by Noah before Judaism. There was a true religion. It was a religion that was taught by Noah. It was taught to Noah. Noah was a priest of God. And there was already a system of divine laws. There was already a concept of divine morality, or of morality from God. And that Noahide faith was corrupted, and that corruption would be paganism. And people began to worship nature. And St. Paul talks about this, how people began to worship nature, worship the creation, and reject the creator of creation. And that was how paganism formed. It was a corruption of the truth. But nonetheless, within paganism, there was still remnants of morality. There was still remnants of the truth, because the corruption of the truth will still have the truth. So I can see why it didn't take long for Christianity to spread amongst the Romans, because the Romans had a sense of civility. Yes, they had the gladiatorial games, and that was the darkness that they had because of paganism. because of the corruption of paganism. But nonetheless, there were still remnants of light within their civilization. And I can totally see why Christianity would be so absorbed by Roman civilization, because it was, I think it really fit with them. Just looking at their temperament and looking at how a lot of them conducted themselves. There was still horrific savagery, don't get me wrong. That savagery was because of the darkness of paganism. But those remnants of truth shined, and you can see that in Julius Caesar. But here you have crusaders raping and pillaging and committing massacres, and they're claiming the cross, which really shows us that a pagan can be more Christian than somebody claiming Christianity. And this was really what Jesus was saying when he talked about the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans were people who, they mixed Judaism with paganism. And here's Jesus saying a Samaritan can follow God better than someone who has the Orthodox Jewish faith, because they have mercy. And here is a case of a pagan, Julius Caesar, being someone who had mercy. And a pagan can exhibit the morals that were taught to humanity by God more than someone claiming the cross. And at times, someone claiming the cross can be just as savage as those pagans who were in the Colosseum cheering on watching people killing themselves, killing each other. It also makes you wonder, because a lot of these crusaders were French, and the Gauls were French. And so the crusaders were basically Gauls who had been Christianized. And that savagery, even if a people becomes Christian, the savagery of their past can still seep through. And we definitely saw that in the French Revolution, where you saw people literally committing cannibalism in the streets. And these were the descendants of the Gauls. So we have to be very, very careful not to fall into this idea that because a people are Christian, that they're always going to exhibit Christianity. No, they may just exhibit the savagery of their ancestors. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.